Hey there, hope you're doing well so far today. So something that comes up a lot in my work with addiction is working with urges, and something that's been happening a lot recently is that in my practice and some of the groups that I'm in, I've been seeing a lot of urges kind of move registers into kind of new domains. And so even after long periods of abstinence, or even after a really good streak of abstinence and progress in recovery, there's just these really interesting urges that have been coming up for folks. And I made a list here, on this doc of a few common ones, using sugar and eating, increases in procrastination, increased use of internet and TV, using relationships and sex, or troubling dynamics coming up in those domains. And then, of course, the urges to either relapse if abstinence is the goal, or if not, if a more moderation approach is the goal. Like I kind of felt sense of a compulsive use of a substance or behavior that doesn't really feel good to get getting a lot of those urges. And so I've been thinking a lot about that, reading a lot of the research on it, chatting with the folks I'm working with a lot about their phenomenological experience of urges. And I'm going to do a quick presentation on that. So what we're going to talk about is the associative learning process. And then we're going to talk about the reason I think that mindfulness is a really underutilized approach that can help us dismantle the feedback loop, dismantle feedback loops that kind of get in our way, that bootstrap themselves onto the associative learning process, which is really important for learning, but can be problematic when it comes to addiction. And then we'll just gloss very quickly some of the things you can do. If you're interested in learning more about the techniques, I really suggest joining our group, and you can reach out to me wherever you find this video, and I can connect you with our group, where we go over, we meet online and we go over many techniques and things similar to this. So if that's your beat, I think that's your best option. But for now, let's jump into the associative learning process. First of all, this process is fundamental for addictive learning behaviors, and I just want to give an example of it. So it usually happens in one of two ways: the positive affect reward, which is more of what we like, and the negative affect reward, less of what we dislike. Okay, so a couple of examples of these, and then we'll go to this really helpful visual to kind of nail it home. So bear with me on with these words. But so, okay, for with positive affect, something happened that's good. We get a craving and an urge to make it better. We then have a memory that's laid down and says, hey, when this happens and I add this makes me feel better. Let's do more of this. And then it feeds back in a reinforcing way, meaning it's more likely to happen the next time we come across that particular starting point, that stimuli. And this is really important, a few big words here, but increases salience with other positive cues. Salience just means kind of like connection. And so what that means is, so let's go to an example here to kind of drill that word salience home. So let's say, we eat a great meal, and then we want to work on drinking less wine, but we get these intense urges to drink some wine with our meal. And if we do that, what happens is there is a salience between food and wine, but then those particular things that we associate with feeling good start to also get linked with other things that we start to feel good, that feel good as well. So then maybe we're at a concert and all of a sudden that feels good, and it's like, oh, maybe we should get some wine up in here, some drinking up in here. And it kind of bypasses the whole original food stimuli. And so this can get out of control really, really quickly. And so this is kind of what happens. There's a positive cue. Let's say it's dinner. You feel good. In this diagram, it says happy or relaxed. There's a craving, like, oh, I want to make this feel a little better. I would love to really double down on this. And then you either smoke or eat more. In this case, it's talking about cigarettes. I was talking about wine, but in this diagram, they're talking about cigarettes. It's a very similar process. Also, for any other substance or problematic thing that comes around, that can be, we can substitute that in here. And then when that happens, we lay down a memory, and that becomes a feedback loop. And then this increased salience means that a larger variety of positive cues become connected in this loop. And something very similar, and this is something that this positive affect one's important to study, but in my work, I see a lot of this negative affect reward process. I see a lot of this just in my particular work. So this should say something that happens that's bad. And then we have a craving to make it better. A memory is laid down, and then there's a feedback. Again, feedback's in a reinforcing way. Same process, but with this one. And then, of course, it increases salience with other negative cues. So exact same process, but just we have it laid out on the other side here. So, we get criticized at work. That feels really terrible. So, maybe we want to reach out to an ex that we had a codependent relationship on, to try and get some reassurance. And that feels better in the short term. And this whole cycle begins again. And we can substitute that in with smoking cigarettes, drinking, eating, etc. And it's something that can really get out of control really, really quickly, and we can that can become a major coping mechanism for us when difficult things happen. And it's oftentimes not the most skillful way to approach it, and can lead to some really negative consequences. And especially if you talk to most people in recovery, severe diminishing returns. And this memory of the time where it was initially helpful seems distant, but yet this cycle is still with us. And there's many interesting things I could say. Maybe in a longer presentation, I will do that. I want to keep this one under 10 minutes. So I'm going to just mention, very interestingly enough, there's many aspects of Buddhist psychology that map on really well, if that's kind of your thing. This idea of dependent origination that comes out of Buddhism. It's an interesting thread to pull on if that's your thing, but it's very similar to our behavioral models for associative learning. And I should say, I've got some of the research down here from Thorndike up to Perkins, if you're into the research, but Thorndike, who started looking at this in 1899, and then Kandel, who won the Nobel Prize, and I believe it was 2001, showed that even sea slugs have associative learning. And so this process is well conserved in our evolutionary lineage. So it's very ancient and deep part of the experience of cognition. So it's something to be reckoned with, but have no fear. We can deal with it skillfully. And this is how we do it. So also there's many things that we could talk about. Two-factor avoidance, which is just kind of, it's another theory that you might want to check out if this is exciting to you. And also trauma, especially childhood trauma, can be very acute in many cases of addiction when we're working with addiction. And so that's something to keep in mind, because this negative affect, these are just kind of words, that I'm saying, obviously, but in practice, being stressed out might understate the experience someone's having in the world. And it might not just be the matter of watching one video and getting some reassuring words, though that is a great start, and we do, even when we've experienced things like trauma, have the ability, the great strength within us to be able to deal with really intense emotions and really find healing. However, it's not always just cut and dry, and we may need the help of a group or the help of a therapist, and that is absolutely important to seek out. And that is a brave thing to do. It's nothing to be ashamed of. So keep that in mind as we're going through this, whether it's for yourself or for a loved one. That, you know, when we say negative affect reinforcement learning, we're making it very conceptual, and that's helpful. However, the felt sense of it can be quite intense, and I am admiring everyone who's able to kind of stay with this kind of material and try to apply it to their life. It's an amazing thing. So shout out to you. But I just want to talk about some of what we often see in recovery, some of the, in substance use treatment, substance and behavior use treatment, some of the common strategies behavioral treatments we'll see is avoidance of cues. In the recovery literature, you might see avoid person, places, and things that are associated with that which you're using, and I put that here, avoidance of cues, that's person, places, and things. And then secondly, substitute behaviors, which is something like, you know, I smoke, I'm going to eat carrots instead. Or I used to drink a lot, now I'm going to exercise a lot. Or kind of trying to substitute behaviors out and kind of use this, not really escape this cycle, which I actually think is a problem. It can be helpful in the short term, but I think it's kind of playing with fire, for lack of the better terms. But to kind of just say, okay, this cycle is intense, but we're just going to substitute out behaviors and get rid of cues, so it's not kind of affecting our life in a damaging way. However, I think what happens is if that behavior becomes inaccessible, or you get some bad luck and you run into those cues, or if just, hey, you know, these substitute behaviors, they're just not doing it anymore. They're just not effective. Then we're going to be back at square one very quickly. And I think this is one of the things that explains the challenge we've had with relapse rates that are quite stark and unfortunate. We've had a lack of success often in our efforts here. So I think this is one way we can improve that, is saying like, yeah, these things can be really important and good and useful, and we definitely want to use them where appropriate. However, there might be a better way, and that's kind of what I'm talking about here. The problem is we don't dismantle this loop of craving. We've got to try to weaken the power of this loop, and perhaps even really get rid of it if we can, and over time with patience and compassion. And also something we see is that I see this all the time. Food, or something that's kind of less of a taboo or not known as something that's really challenging for the person or is easy to hide, becomes substituted for the what was once the addictive behavior, and we could end up with something like a sugar addiction or a coffee addiction, or, you know, not that those are the sugar addiction can be really, really unhealthy. Sometimes things can be less quote unquote unhealthy. However, I think in the long term, from a quality of life perspective and just from a mastery perspective, really being able to get to the root of the problem is a really good thing. And so I like to work with mindfulness with urges. And I've got, in the literature, it's often called the Mindfulness Wedge. So instead of working with the cues and changing the behaviors, we distance the time between craving, or that thing that happens in our mind when we're like, oh, this moment isn't okay. You know, I want more of being happier and relaxed, and I want less of being stressed out. In between the moment of realizing that and the action to get out of whatever state we're in that's not good enough, slowly and compassionately increasing that distance. I think that is one way to talk about what mindfulness is. Obviously, many great books, videos that you could get different definitions for, but in the practice of addiction and craving, that's how I would describe it, very contextually. And I'll kind of end with, yeah, we want to work with craving so we don't act on this loop. And really here, less is more. We don't need to get very systematic or difficult about this. Paying attention and things start to take care of themselves. A really good case study from the literature on smoking cigarettes is someone for the first time paid attention to what it tasted like in years, what it tasted like to smoke cigarettes. And it's like, and they said, mindful smoking smells like stinky cheese and tastes like chemicals. Yuck. And they were, kind of able to start seeing, like, what am I getting out of this? What am I avoiding? And in the smart recovery literature, which I work with a lot, we have the cost-benefit analysis. So it's like, well, this does give me some anxiety relief, but it also is really kind of gross. It tastes gross to me personally. And there's many health benefits. And I wonder if there's a different way to cope with anxiety. Possibly, maybe not. Try it out for yourself. But we've got some really interesting, and I'll talk about that to end on in the Does It Work. This is a great study from the Golden Standard smoking cigarette cessation approach. Is called Freedom from Smoking. This is the difference between a 4 weeks of it's working with abstinence. Here on the y-axis, which percent are abstinence at the end of the treatment, and 17 weeks. So about 35% for the mindfulness, about 15% for the freedom from smoking, and those results were maintained 17 weeks later, which is really, really exciting. And so it's a really it can be really, really powerful. And I'm going to start wrapping this video up. What I will say is, if you're interested in more of, like, okay, what does this mean, Brian? How do I apply this? I think check out our Smart Recovery meetings. You can get that information from me. I've got Facebook events, etc. Also, if you want this doc, I've got an enormous amount of that might have been a bit hyperbolic, but I have at least 3 long sections on different kind of mindfulness techniques you can put into play. That if reading's more your style, I'm working on over time, breaking this stuff down and making it more reader friendly. But if you're down to tackle this Google Doc, it'll be in the comments of wherever you're watching this video. And so with that, I'd like to really thank you for checking out this presentation. It was fun to chat about. I hope to see you at a meeting or chat with you in the comments somewhere. And have a great day. And kudos to you for making it through this presentation and for working on your life and showing some great courage and vulnerability to go on this journey. All right, bye.